You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our dinner and dialogue gathering with Tracy Johansson on January 7th, 2026. Thanks for tuning in.
So as I was wondering about what to share tonight, I found myself thinking about the stories that we all tell about our lives and noticing those moments of transition in our lives. When something shifts, when we cross a threshold, or when life asks us to make a change. And it's these moments in time that I'm fascinated by and I'm curious about. How do they shape us? How do they offer us unexpected adventure and sometimes invite resilience? So tonight I'd like to share a few of those moments from my life, the transition points that helped shape me into the person that I'm still becoming. I'm still a work in progress. My maternal grandmother lived to be 100, so I'm hoping I have lots of years left on my journey. And speaking of my grandmother, she used to have a recording of me being asked what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was 5 years old. And I very enthusiastically said, I want to be a go-go dancer. And I think it was those white boots. I really like those little white boots. And this story still makes me smile, because it's that little person who is already imagining the future and what might be possible, and how we make plans and then have to adapt to what really might be in store for us. And my mom still likes to say, life is what happens when you're making other plans. And maybe that resonates with you too. When I was a kid, family connections were really important to all of us. I can remember at least 2 road trips driving from Colorado to Florida and back. That was to see my dad's folks. And because we lived so close to my mom's family, we spent all of our holidays at my grandparents', and I have wonderful memories of Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. My maternal grandparents were really the life of the party. My grandmother's house was decorated to the nines for Christmas every single year. They were kind people, always up for exploring. They traveled well into their 80s to Europe. And this was way before the internet. And I didn't realize how extraordinary that was until I started traveling in my 50s to Europe. And so I still marvel at their energy levels. They had way more energy than I did. My grandmother was a school teacher, and I loved to pretend I was a teacher too. My poor brother, I can't imagine what I put him through. Several of my family members were school teachers. My mom, my uncle, my stepfather. I can see now how they influenced me and how I've carried on that family tradition. And although my father wasn't an actual school teacher, he modeled calm, patience, and curiosity. He was always learning something new, building and fixing things, cooking, hunting, fishing, gardening. He even taught himself to sew and to embroider, and he loved being adventurous. He encouraged my brother and I to live each day fully. And that also meant slowing down and taking time to notice the simple things. He loved to point out the graceful beauty of a hawk flying overhead and the delicate details inside of a flower. Growing up, we lived in Colorado. And it seems like most weekends we were off camping or going jeeping, fishing, hiking, or camping. And when I say camping, I don't mean campgrounds. We basically bushwhacked. So it was the 1960s, And there were no restrooms, no fire pits, no running water, just lots of nature. My brother and I loved all of this. We loved the freedom of running around and just kind of going wild. But apparently, my mom was a little concerned. She tells the story that she would tie little bells on our shoes. She called them bear bells. She was worried about bears or eagles carrying us off, so she wanted to be sure to know where we were. So she listened for the bells. Well, we weren't carried off, thank goodness, and I still love hiking and being in nature. And I should mention that all of this excitement might have been because my parents were really, really young. My mom was 19 and my dad was 21 when I was born. My brother arrived 11 months later, and we sort of all grew up together. These early experiences gave me a sense of freedom and trust and curiosity. I still love to understand everything from the inside out, sometimes taking my time to make decisions, and sometimes just making a leap. When I was 12, we left this way of life behind us when my dad quit his job and we moved from Colorado to Eastern Washington. My folks had purchased a 60-acre apple orchard. It was my parents' dream to live off the land and also to live in a log cabin. And so with friends and family, we literally built a log cabin in the middle of the orchard. And every farmer will tell you, this way of life, farming, it's hard work. Pruning, irrigation, frost alarms, and harvest seasons are the cycles of the year. My brother and I pitched in after school when we could, but my parents worked really, really hard. And we adjusted to life in a small town, very different from where we'd come from in Colorado. And part of that adjustment was joining a little evangelical Christian church. We were looking for community, but it ended up not being quite right for us. So later, we joined the Presbyterian church, and my brother and I enjoyed youth group and summer camp. When I was 16, everything changed. A threshold moment. On a cloudy winter day on January 11th, I had a cold and I stayed home from school. My dad was home too, not feeling well. I remember giving him a big hug before going off to take a nap, and I remember saying goodnight. I didn't know then that it would be actually goodbye. I never saw my father again. While I was asleep, he had a fatal heart attack and died in my mother's arms. He was 37 years old, and this was devastating for my whole family. The loss of my father shaped me in an instant and changed how I experienced life, how I experienced trust and love. I was too young to process this huge loss, this life change, and the weight of it stayed in my heart and in my psyche, just out of reach for many years. And looking back now, I realize how my being super driven, super busy all the time, and then eventually symptoms of physical stress, how those were deeply related to grief and loss. And it took many years of gentle healing practices to eventually build back my resilience. And remembering the gifts from my father to slow down, to stay curious, to be patient. Also a gift, I try to love, appreciate, and live each day as if it could be my last, because you never know. Oh, and goodbyes are still very important and sacred to me. During college, continuing a family tradition, I lived in London for a year. And walking on that land and feeling the history of thousands of years of humanity, including more recently my relatives there, was very powerful. It's where my eyes were opened to new ways of seeing everything: art, history, politics, and also expanding my spiritual practice. I was introduced to nature-based religions and Buddhism, And I was excited that this concept of God could be so much bigger than what I had originally been taught. This year changed me in so many ways. And I would say, ultimately, I met Matthew thinking that he might be a British artist when I first saw him in class later when I got back. Shortly after I returned to the States, Matthew and I met at the University of Washington, and that was 42 years ago this month. We lived in Seattle for many years, and our boys were born there. During those years, I was a paralegal, a stay-at-home mom, and later a natural childbirth teacher. When our boys were little, we made the leap to move to Santa Barbara in 1999. We didn't know anyone here, but we knew we'd enjoy the weather. It was the quickest decision that we ever made, my mom still likes to point out. We've made wonderful friends here, and our boys are now launched. We lived in Germany for several years. I got my master's degree in clinical psychology and became a well-being coach. I got serious about my meditation practice, and following in the family tradition of teaching, I'm now a meditation teacher. And as I start to wrap up tonight, I wanted to share my most recent life-changing moment. And some of you already know that I had cataract surgery a few months ago. And having the cataracts removed was wonderful for me, but actually the life change has been the corrective lenses I now have. I'm not wearing glasses. And for the first time since I was 7 years old, I can see without glasses or contacts. And I knew I had terrible vision, but until my surgeon said that only about 1% of the population had vision as bad as mine, and that I was beyond legally blind, I had not realized how this had probably been impacting my whole life. As humans, we're incredibly adaptable, and I'm so grateful for that, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have had the surgery. It truly has been life-changing. And so, as you can see, I didn't become a go-go dancer, but I did grow into someone who's still curious, still learning, and now finally seeing the world with a little more clarity, and that feels pretty good. I had fun looking back on my life, getting ready to share this with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your transition points and how they've shaped you. So here are the discussion questions tonight. The self question. What is one transition in your life, chosen or unexpected, that shaped how you see the world today? And looking back, has the way you relate to this experience changed at all? Is there something positive you now carry forward from it? And the sacred question. Where do you see a thread of meaning or perhaps calling emerging through the transitions or threshold places, even if they didn't make sense at the time? And how has that influenced who you are becoming now? And do you have meaningful practices or rituals that help you navigate life's inevitable transition places? And finally, the society question. We've all lived through significant political and societal transitions in these recent years. And where have you noticed signs of adaptation, resilience, or possibility, either locally or more broadly? How might being in community help us stay grounded and connected during challenging collective transitions?
Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.